Welcome in to another episode of the Rochford Files with your host, that's kind of between the coast, coming to you from the Mile Highland City. It is Andrew Rochford, welcoming y'all here as we are live from the garden of YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. So thanks so much, and if you happen to be watching right now on Twitter, please go over to YouTube, like and subscribe, or follow me on Twitch. I know that it always takes a few minutes for anyone who does come into the chat. It's usually not right off at the start. So, got a lot of stuff to talk about today. Shuffled the card up a bit after I realized what needed to be covered instead. So also going to talk a bit about a PSL activist who called out politicians at the Summit of the Americas in relation to the Bolivia coup. And then we got going on Thom Hartmann because of an article that he posted on Salon yesterday, which got ratioed so damn hard that Salon deleted the tweet of the article, but they still got that shit up on their website. So, got to tear in on that. Then we also got to discuss how scary it is that the Supreme Court ruling yesterday, where they ruled that pretty much border agents have pretty much can enter your house if you're in that 100-mile border zone, whether you want them to or not, and why that's should be a very disturbing thing for anyone. Then there's a couple progressive recall with defense attorneys happening, so gotta break down that propaganda that's happening with those two instances. And then there was also a big update in the Patrick Lyoya case. And then the Washington Commanders defensive coordinator got himself in trouble for his red pilling statements with when it came to the George Floyd protest and January 6th. So that's the plan, and if you stick with me, I do have a pretty big guest announcement that'll break out towards the end of the show. But for now, let's get started with that PSL activist who disrupted the OAS chief, Luis Almagro, at that Summit of Americas event yesterday.
And he was killed. You're here to lecture about media freedom when you insult a dictatorship that murders journalists and murders innocent people. You have blood on your hands. Because of your lies, there was a coup in Bolivia, a coup against a democratically elected government. And that dictatorship that you helped install massacred 36 people, 36 innocent people who are protesting for the restoration of their democracy, for the restoration of the independence of their country. And the towns of Sacabal and Secata, people were protesting peacefully, indigenous people, workers, women, students, demanding the restoration of that democracy that you helped destroy because the United States wanted to plunder the resources, the lithium, the gold, all the mineral resources, the gas of Bolivia, the corporations in Wall Street in the United States wanted to loot the resources of Bolivia. And so you helped install a dictatorship that would facilitate that looting. In Sacaba and Chaycata, dozens of people were massacred by the soldiers of your dictatorship. The soldiers of your dictatorship. And one of the people that your dictatorship murdered was a journalist. Sebastian Moro. He was a journalist who was exposing the lies that you were telling and exposing the truth about the coup that you orchestrated, and he was beaten to death in his apartment. And now you come here and dare to lecture about media freedom, about democracy, about human rights. You have no shame. You're a murderer, and you're a puppet of the United States. A puppet of the United States. In Venezuela, too, you dared to support the coup attempt that Juan Guaido ridiculously, outrageously tried to attempt and declare himself the president of Venezuela. What a lie! What a lie! The majority of people in Venezuela had never even heard of Juan Guaido. And yet you said that he's the president, and I believe you still ridiculously say that Juan Guaido is the president of Venezuela. That is an outrage and an insult to the democracy and the sovereignty of the people of Venezuela. How dare you do this? You murderer who murdered people in Bolivia. You murderer who supported the sanctions in Venezuela. The sanctions in Venezuela that killed 40,000 people. 40,000 people because of your lies, because of the coup attempt that you've been part of. And you are nothing but a murderer, and you have no shame here to come and talk about human rights, to lecture the whole world, to lecture the whole hemisphere, about democracy and the freedom of the press. When Sebastian Moro, an Argentine journalist who is in Bolivia, exposing the truth about the coup, and he was killed. You're here to lecture about media freedom when you insult the dictatorship and murders journalists and murders innocent people, workers, indigenous people, students, you.
Wow, that was one awesome moment to view from the lens of supporting someone who had a real life opportunity to call out a corrupt politician right to their face. And I'm going to point out that when you're at that type of setting wherein it's not American politicians, they let you go on for more than 2 minutes. However, when several people, such as like Mike Preisner and a couple of those other anti-war voices, tried to speak out against a war criminal like George W. Bush, you barely got 15-20 seconds in. And when it's international politicians, he got to go on a long time. And it's honestly, when you're on the left and you get to have an opportunity to be a truth teller and get to challenge a politician right in the proximity of where they're at, man, that's a very impressive viral moment. And in typical fashion, even though the video didn't really show the people on stage, all that they could do was take that in silence. You didn't even hear anyone directly from the stage yell to get him out. Kind of like, as I referenced to the George Bush, when he's had moments of people actually trying to hold him to account for the millions of people that died at the hands of his war crimes. And the United States is the top of the imperialist game. And I say that Israel's the right-hand man. Ukraine's becoming the left-hand man now, given how they have like $56 billion given to them. But then there's also, they got plenty of their people who are going to help facilitate that in the Americas, like whoever's been installed as a fascist puppet of the state, so to speak, like the OAS chief, Luis Almagro. Among many others. And that's been the most viral moment that I've noticed from that event, other than earlier in the week, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador opting to not attend in solidarity with Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua. And I noticed a lot of people thought he was white, and if that's true, that was a great use of that white privilege being put, especially given how he was able to go on as long as he did. And we need more people across the country, across the globe, making sure that you call politicians out on their bullshit relentlessly, not just occasionally. If we were really doing it the way that we should, there'd be dozens upon dozens of videos you'd see every day. And until we get to that point, we're probably not in the right place or we won't be in the right place for a true revolution in this country. But I think it's going to take longer than many of us who are more ready for it to happen would like it to be. So next, I think it's now a good time to go rip Thom Hartmann. He's one of those those legacy progressive types who are also definitely part of the progressive managerial class. So when you're part of that professional managerial class, that just means you're privileged enough and comfortable enough to continuously tell people to vote blue no matter who. And even if you're only saying it conditionally for progressives, you're also making a few exceptions to that, like presidents. Others, it could be adding your Senate and House representatives. So once you get to that point, then you're not really just conditionally telling people to vote for progressives. What you're really doing is telling people to vote blue no matter who, too. And this Salon article that got posted from him yesterday ties back to the issue of gun control. As I mentioned a bit recently, when Salon posted this article yesterday morning, it got ratioed so bad that Salon removed it, deleted the tweet on it. But there's a good reason for why this article from Thom Hartmann deserves so much criticism. Title of it: Ronald Reagan's Movement, a Massive Historical Irony, How Armed Black Men Led to Gun Control. And then the worst part is going to be the interpretation of it, like this draw in line here. When armed Black Panthers showed up at the California State Capitol in 1967, they probably saved thousands of lives. And that line right there is such a bullshit white comfort type of framing, because the Black Panthers weren't about, uh, they got being used as a tool for white comfort. But the reality is, in a way, that's what it led to. See, let's start off here. On May 2nd, 1967, the destinies of Huey Newton, Bobby Seale, and Ronald Reagan collided. The day saved untold thousands of lives. At the time, California was an open carry state with few gun restrictions. Governor Reagan was on the steps of the state capitol to meet and share lunch with a group of visiting 8th graders when Newton, Seale, and nearly 30 other Black Panthers pulled up front in a small caravan of cars. Armed with everything from pistols to 12-gauge shotguns, they climbed the half-dozen steps to the area around the front doors of the building. Seale pulled out a prepared statement and read it to the students and people in front of the Capitol. Black people have begged, prayed, petitioned, and demonstrated everything else to get the racist power structure of America to right the wrongs which have historically been perpetuated against Black people. The time has come for Black people to arm against this terror before it is too late. Then they walked into the building to confront the state's police and legislators, fully loaded guns and rifles in their hands. Reagan was aghast, and the nearly all-white California legislator panicked. There's no reason why, on the street today, a citizen should be carrying loaded weapons, like Reagan said later that afternoon. Within weeks, Republican Assemblyman Don Mulford, with bipartisan support, introduced into the California Assembly Law AB-1591 to ban people in California from carrying loaded weapons in public. It was enthusiastically signed into law by Reagan on July 28, fewer than 3 months after Seale's proclamation at the Capitol. Over the following years, California built on that initial gun control law after a 1989 school shooting in Stockton, when a young white man wielding a semi-automatic weapon murdered 5 children and a teacher while injuring 30 others. California passed a ban on assault weapons that stands to this day. But before I go any further here, it's also important to go in on the fact that the problem with what this led to, what it really did, what really just became a way to stop the potential revolutionary movement from the Black Panthers. And while you think that this was a move made to make people safer, the reality is it really just prevented a revolution from being carried out in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. And what we're seeing right now with gun control being a hot button issue, this could, as unlikely as it sounds, you would think they would really would try to disarm the country if that's what it took to prevent a true revolution from happening. The school went on to ban private gun sales, closing the notorious gun show loophole that poured weapons into other states. California requires all gun dealers to be registered and licensed by the state, mandate background checks, and even outlawed the manufacture of sale of cheap Saturday night special handguns in the state. And California put its own version of red flag laws in place, laws forbidding people flagged at risk for committing gun crimes or mass murders from purchasing guns. The state followed up. It's one of the few in the country with the agency that studies gun violence and found them to be nearly 100% effective because of how difficult the state makes it to obtain a weapon. However, the inconsistency of gun laws have made it to where these basic bans, reforms, whatever variants you like to consider it, they end up being ineffective because so many of these mass shooters often obtain it illegally. While in Texas, a violent criminal on the federal no-fly terrorist watch list is welcome to buy a dozen assault weapons from the back of a car and go shoot up a school. In California, you can't even buy a gun. You've been convicted of any violent crime whatsoever, even a misdemeanor like a bar fight. Even with that being said, even with the extra hoops that a state like California can put people through, if someone wants a gun badly enough, they'll be able to figure out a way to bring it back into the state. As a result, according to the New York Times, I don't also forget the black market. Someone sells it to a person that shouldn't have been able to obtain it legally. Let's jump a couple paragraphs down. California still has more gun deaths than any other state in the nation except Texas. As the NRA will quickly point out, what they won't highlight is that California, with 40 million people, about the same as Florida and New York combined, has the largest population of any state in America. It's bigger than 198 of the 235 nations. But compare California's rate of 7 gun deaths per 100,000 to states with virtually no gun control like Mississippi 28.6, Louisiana 26.3, Wyoming 25.9, Missouri 23.9, or Alabama 23.6, and the effectiveness of these prohibitions become obvious. If you live in Texas, floating around the national average of 14.2 gun deaths per 100,000, you're far more likely to die from a bullet in the states with strong gun control than in places like Hawaii 3.4, Massachusetts 3.7, New Jersey 5, Rhode Island 5.1, New York 5.3, or Connecticut 6. When your gun nut brother-in-law starts babbling about gun deaths in Chicago, Illinois with reasonable gun control laws 14.1 per 100,000, you may have to point out that nearly 60% of guns seized in Chicago come from out of the state, with most coming from next door Indiana, 17.3 per 100,000, where gun stores dot the Indiana side of the state line. And this is, yes, exactly, Yipper. But this is the next thing. People, liberals can often go to this basic level of argument for the why so much gun crime happens in Chicago. What they often fail to blame it on is systemic racism plays a huge role in the higher levels of gun crime in California. Chicago, I meant. Getting mixed up in Chicago, California was the big theme of the article. Then the next thing is it's a very neoliberal controlled type city, which means capitalism is playing a huge role in why there's a huge uptick in gun crime in that city, as opposed to what Republicans like, the conservatives like to do here, is just use it as a racist dog whistle on black people. When the reality is, if though, think about how far less crimes we would have if people's basic needs were met. And if you feel good about your 3 to 5 deaths per 100,000 people, guess what? If this was a country that was about making sure people's basic needs were met, I imagine we'd get ourselves down to like 1 to 2 per 100,000, maybe even better. But if your idea is to just settle on the gun control narrative, then you're not going to help really solve this crime, this epidemic, a cultural issue fed by a system of politicians who are partly which are NRA controlled and partly controlled by the system of capitalism. So you're not going to get either thing truly accomplished in the way that you would like. And this is why Thom Hartmann's article is such a problem here, because in typical white progressive fashion, you're typically only going to cling on to the white suburbia type of politics that would really only benefit that group of people, and while stopping short of really helping the poor, marginalized working class communities. And with the way that they've talked about their social democracy, they aren't really serious about going all the way through with it. Let's see, is there anything else? No, I think that's good enough. I think I read enough of the important stuff from this article and gave you most of the main criticism with this article is how this framed falsely virtue as the Black Panthers as heroes for gun control, when this really was the Black Panthers getting this gun control was really used against the Black Panthers to prevent their ultimate goal of a revolution happening in this country. And we're getting to 55, 60 years later, and all that we've seen is the politicians, this political system that tries to keep us under complete control. All that they have done is continuously make it harder and rig this capitalist system in a way that makes it even harder for us to fight back. And this is also, and this type of article arguments lead to disarming of the people. And we are at a terrible time to be talking about disarming the people. Do y'all forget? The focus should definitely be more so on the incompetence of the police state, how they're not really there to protect you, and how their focus is on the property and the elite. And that's why it goes straight into the white liberal comfort zone. And that's what the gun control uh, discussion really is. Because even if you follow through nationally on that, you're not going to get very many people to voluntarily disarm themselves. Maybe if you're Mia Khalifa, maybe, but not very many other people beyond that will. So let's get into this Supreme Court ruling next, and the danger of what this case means. Let's get it. We'll go this way first. In a 6-3 vote, the Supreme Court ruled that Border Patrol agents may unconstitutionally enter a person's home without a warrant and arrest him. And federal courts are powerless to do anything about it. The border, once again, is a constitution-free zone. And let's pull up a map to illustrate how much of the country this applies to. And if you noticed on the thumbnail for today's show, this is why I put a big yellow border to illustrate covering the story. For those of you who haven't seen, how much of the United States population is within this 100-mile border zone? I'm coming to you from a city which is not in that 100-mile border enforcement zone, which, by the way, is roughly around where the word cities is at. And that, by the way, is 60% of the world's population, the country's population, lives within this 100-mile border enforcement zone. And think about, before we keep this on topic of this border and how scary that this ruling for the Supreme Court should be for all citizens, not just the people who are at immigration are like a target for border agents. But think about if when the real climate disaster shit gets real. Imagine all those people trying to get further and further to the middle of the country. That's going to be a very scary day if many of us in this like millennial and Gen Z happen to be around for it. However, if it's not one of our two generations, it could be one of the next two generations following that. And you know why this should uh, definitely scare the fuck out of you? Because they are ruling that they can enter your home without your permission or not. Then, if you decide to take self defense against these Border Patrol agents, then you still get in trouble. So, the Supreme Court is making this a win win for Border Patrol agents, and this is an extremely disturbing event. And this should be one of those moments that should embolden people to want to fight back against this system. Because the way I see it is, it doesn't matter if you're a brown person down at the southern citizen, that is, living down at the southern border, or if you happen to be someone on the northern border, a part of the border that gets heard less often about, even for these cases, even though this Supreme Court ruling was based on something that happened by the Canadian border. But the point is that even if you're a white person, a black person, Asian person who are less commonly the targets of deportation or harassment compared to brown people, the point is this should be scary to you as well when your right to your home, your property rights don't matter, is what they're essentially saying, and that they can pretty much go in on you whenever they want. And I think this is what it may not really resonate with you when it's Breonna Taylor who gets killed from a illegal entry into a home. But maybe this one will, because with the way they are saying it, they could enter anyone's home and you can't do anything about it. And yes, white people who are around this border enforcement zone, this should disturb you as well. Because what if they mistakenly enter your home thinking that someone that they were looking for was supposed to be there, but they weren't? And what if they decide to just shoot someone there anyway, even when you from the sounds of it, this ruling pretty much is giving those border agents a really ironclad diplomatic immunity to do whatever they want. But this is the type of shit that they can get away with when people are complacent and are willing to go along with their conditions continually getting worse and worse. And I hope people would start to wake up to this. It's easy to look at this map and say, oh, I'm like on the outer part of this. Like, I'm close to 90 to 100 miles away from the border. I'm not worried. So even if you're like in Bakersfield, Alamo Gonda, Charlottesville, Madison, you should be just as concerned as someone in Corpus Christi, Miami, LA, Seattle, Boston, New York, Philadelphia. Because you're going to see, and even DC, because you're going to see one of these cases come up, and the public is going to be extremely outraged, and we'll just have this Supreme Court ruling to go back to, pointing to how they put in all these protections in place to potentially allow border agents to be jury, judge, and executioner. All right, so now I think it's a good time to get in on the important part of big topic for this next part. Here's Chesa Boudin, the San Francisco defense attorney, just got recalled. And it's based on bullshit propaganda. And then it's going to connect to how there's now a push for another progressive DA in Los Angeles getting pushed for a recall campaign now as well. Also based on that same bullshit propaganda. So let's dive in. All right, let's. I think this is it. No. Yeah. And we're going to go to a thread from Brian Edwards Tyker. And there's the info right there. This thread looked pretty good, even though I hadn't heard of him before then. Local journalist here, with a thread on why you should absolutely not do what this headline writer did, and treat the recall of Chesa Boudin as a referendum of national significance on criminal justice reform. As you can see here from this New York Times headline, California sends Democrats and the nation a message on crime. And I'm going to tell you that's flat out wrong, because all they really did was send a message that they were able to use a propagandist campaign in order to get someone out. And also, the other aspect of this here is Chesa Boudin has actually tried to shake up the system. And when you're doing too much to try to change shit, even locally, they're going to try to get rid of you. And this is exactly what happened here. They can do their fear-mongering campaign of rising crime. But many of us here who are above falling victim to that know that it's really a systemic issue that cannot be solved by adding more and more police into the streets. All the other elections yesterday, Breitbart once stopped Oakland, where the homicide rate is 4 times San Francisco's, and you're in a county where a progressive reformer took first place in the DA primary, and the law and order sheriff barely made it to a runoff. Ride further to Contra Costa, and progressive DA reformer defeated a tough-on-crime challenger so handily there won't even be a runoff. These counties combined have more than triple the population of San Francisco, but a fraction of the press attention. And there it is, Diana Becton beat Mary Knox, 57 to 43%. 2 local fundamentals. San Francisco's citywide elections go poorly for progressives. Boudin got in with a tiny margin in a 3-way race against an appointee with no experience in politics. His hold on citywide office was always tenuous, not newly tenuous. So, there's a reason why Nancy Pelosi is so comfortable in that seat when a city like San Francisco is so hostile to progressive politicians. AWCSN, what's up? Hopefully work's going well for you. And that's why Shahid Buttar, part of why he lost the first attempt to unseat her 75 to 25% the first go around. And why this is such an uphill mountain for him to climb, even though I do respect him continuing to try, even though running as a Democrat won't get the same type of support, even though Nancy Pelosi is absolutely someone that you should want to see ousted, even with the sham of this idea of trying to reform the Democratic Party. It's a complicated thing because even with the most powerful ghoulish people, you would still like to see those people go. Recall fundamentals. Incumbents always want to shape an election as a choice between an opponent they write attacks on, rather than a referendum that asks voters if things are going well. That's impossible under San Francisco recall rules, with no opponent on the ballots. 4. Finance. Recall campaigns can raise unlimited donations. That advantages San Francisco's concentrated finance, tech, and real estate capital. A breathtaking $7.2 million and counting went into attacking Boudin, who had no opponent on the ballot to attack in turn. 5. The data. The poll showed Chesa Boudin's policy setting up a workers' protection unit and an innocence commission, and in cash bail and adult charges for children, were considerably more popular than Chesa Boudin himself. And here's some recent public polling results. Here. And the result, 48% voted yes for the recall. By the way, those were people propagandized by the wealthy, the tech industry. And following that was the examples of the policies that they support to a higher popularity than himself. The campaign's own words. Recall opponents themselves publicly identified as supporters of criminal justice reform. They conceded the substantive policy ground to defeat the person advancing it. Bitter headline: Bucking Regional Trend, Bay Area's fourth largest county, trades progressive DA for vague assurances of continued reforms under unknown successor. And he must work at a radio station, so he plugged that there. And hopefully, some people did help because we do need some smaller radio systems with people doing independent journalism like this BET guy himself. And lastly, he says he's grateful to cover local politics with nuance, covers crime as a social phenomenon instead of a series of fluid spectacles. Ask how reforms are working before ask how they're playing hypothetical backlash voters. And the reason why this is such an important topic to break down is because of the fact that, once again, they're manipulating the people at large into being against the idea of sticking with the guy who is actually trying to shake up the system at the local level. And they just use manipulated some crime numbers in their favor in order to use it as a justification to get this recall campaign taking off. And the reason why I say that is the police and the people who reinforce the status quo, which they would like to give further and further power to this police state, they justify it with rising crime. And they used some manipulation of rising crime numbers as a case for this campaign. And they're going to do this again. And this is the problem with it, is that you get people who are very easily manipulated into these type of counterproductive actions. And there's still a long ways to go here. And I know that the examples that they use as support for that are also things that are easily a function of capitalism causing the problem, which means that even with progressive DA reformist, that they can only do so much until you have the policies coupled with it in order to really truly bring down more specific types of crimes, because we've actually seen a pretty regular drop in crime as you look at it from more of like a 5-year to decade by decade type thing. However, when it comes to the police state, they're always going to cherry pick the numbers of like specific types of crimes that happen to be up at the time in order to use it as a justification to make sure that they get to get the control back. And as a way to make sure that they can crush the people who are trying to shock the system. Was chess Boudin perfect by any means, or uh, did he get to really follow through on everything that he had campaigned on? No, but he was actually trying to still follow through on some things that made it to where he was enough of a threat to where the powerful and elite in San Francisco wanted a way to oust him. And next, this is going to take us to uh, LA. They've got a progressive defense attorney as well. And the thing that makes this one so sickening is the fact that you've got a fascist bleeding liberal and Patricia Arquette now on board with this. And where is that? Right here. And this is the progressive DA, George Gascon, who is now the next victim of a recall campaign. And if you know anything about the LA police, you know that they got that system extremely tied up. They're up, even though typically your city's going to have at least 40% of the budget. There's going to be cities that have an even greater level of power when they're like 50% or more, like a New York or an LA. And yesterday, Patty shared the recall. And this is the People's City Council of LA, a very good account fighting against the propaganda and the police state of Los Angeles. And they're also, we're all trying to help fight against like the homelessness, people getting evicted, like that Echo Park when they took down the homeless community there. If you remember, that was about a year ago, by the way. Then this account's like, what the fuck, Patty? Are you a Republican now? Then, in her typical blue fascist, liberal fascist manner, no, I'm against home invasion robberies. And let's continue. Alex Fernie is now next. But if you're so concerned about crime, I want to do something more useful than promote right-wing propaganda. Why not Google LASD gangs? And here she is again. And you Google armed home invasion robberies, Los Angeles. Google mom and baby hit by car, Los Angeles. Then next here is Adam Johnson sharing an article. I wrote about the successful Boudin recall, the messy work of meaningful prison reform, and the dispositive role white liberal homeowners are playing in the growing right-wing backlash to the George Floyd protest and the BLM movement. Then someone rightfully pointed out, Chad Loader, hey, Patty Arquette, he's talking about you. Then the same repetitive uh, white comfort tweet here. Someone else rightfully calling her out on this bullshit. So Patty Arquette just came out as a far-right conservative political agent. Then another tweet. I understand Now, my life and the life of people like me does not have value to you and your racist, homophobic, transphobic friends. You honestly think agreeing with them on this one thing means I have to support anything else? And of course it does. It ultimately means that you're choosing false negative peace over true liberation for the LGBTQ community, black people, brown people, Asian people, and indigenous people, and other marginalized communities. That's what it ultimately means, Patty, the Saddie. And another tweet from the People's City Council of LA. Liberals are going to offer us up to fascists. No doubt about it. You're going to get people killed. And she thinks that this line of thinking is, you're going to get people killed. Do you live here? People are getting arm robbed all over the place. A woman and her baby were run over next to nothing. Then another tweet from Vishal P. Singh. Holy shit, not only does Patricia Arquette admit to allying with racist, homophobes, transphobes, she also admits she's been swayed by the disinformation campaign that they have led. Liberal, rich white women are this easily convinced to team up with the alt-right. Do you think he should stay? Then, of course, calling her out some more, you're teaming up with a fascist. Then she kept. Then another one from the show. I'm not backing down on this. Patty Arquette is allying with the same conservative transphobes and homophobes that want to make it illegal for transgender people to exist, like the Daily Wire and PragerU. I certainly don't agree with them on many things and will not support them in such cases, but I will align on certain issues with people fighting for a common cause, such as Republicans for LGBTQ rights, Republicans for gun reform, and Republicans for women's choice. Seriously, get a load of this clown. We've seen what happens when there's any form of a successful outreach to like the anti-Trump Republican. And we saw what that really did. The Lincoln Log Project really just got more people to befriend more of these anti-Trump Republican types who were just more interested in a Trump-like person without the mean tweets in Joe Biden. And that's what they got. And they got what they wanted. And the fact that Joe Biden has flat out refused to change any of the worst policies that Donald Trump had made worse during his time in office. But the fact is, Joe Biden is also playing the feeble, powerless guy who can't do anything. And it's such infuriating given how this inflation is now becoming the most, should be the issue that's most affecting us right now. And this goes to show you that when you make a liberal choose between revolution or not put it that way, but liberation or false peace, they're always going to choose the false peace. And this last tweet right here from her was very telling of that. Because if Patty here knew that there was more problems with crime than just a matter of reforming things, and whether that there was enough cops or not to take care of things, she would know that the real problems are actually developed by a capitalist system that is such a damn high motivation for these crimes happening. And when you choose to side with the right wing propaganda in the situation, just like she is, you're always going to choose the most counterproductive route to ever making any change happen. And this is where it's important to point out the city of Sacramento. It has, and the DA in Sacramento, she's a Republican. And you know how the crime is in the Republican DA led city of Sacramento, just as fucking high as all the other blue cities, major cities. And I'm sure the right likes to often point to the mayors first. But the thing is, we should really be pointing to how much of the city's funding is being tied up by police. Then we can look at the mayors and see how, whether they're a captured force to the police state there. Then we can also consider, give a bit of consideration towards that governor of that state as well. And this is why this thing is annoying, because it's so easy to see that red and blue essentially the same when it comes to how they would handle crime in their cities. I mean, one of the only cities right now where the Republican mayor is Jacksonville. And do we think that Jacksonville is any significantly better if you're fear mongering about high crime rates than all the other blue mayor cities, major cities in the United States? No. And I say this because there's also a lot of mayors who probably would like to be Republicans, like Eric Adams, but they know they have no chance of being able to get through political office if they were. So just know that propaganda is always going to work in its best interest for themselves. Doesn't matter whether there's a progressive DA who's in there trying to do things to really make serious reform happen, or whether they have your standard neoliberal who truly won't do anything to threaten them, a la Amy Klobuchar, and it also Republicans can show when they actually somehow get through and get that seat that things won't be any better under them than it is with your average blue. Just know that Democrats the corporate media propaganda is going to lead to them trying to go back to the way they were in the late 80s, early 90s, and try to be the tougher on crime party. We saw that once the George Floyd protests died down, that Joe Biden wanted to slowly start to embrace the tougher on crime mantra, and he really ramped it up more after he started to take office. And the reality is that's never going to work for them because too many people already believe that Republicans are the tough on crime party. And so many people, fortunately, are fall uh, victim to that right wing propaganda system where they believe any type of lies that come from the Fox News, the News One type of outlets. When the reality is, once you break out of that corporate big media propaganda, you'll see it more from an unbiased viewpoint. And the real fact is, they want a massive police state to make sure that we are being complicit. They don't they don't want something to replace them to make it to where their existence can no longer be justified. However, we should all be fighting for that. What Uvalde showed us is that the police state is not there to work for us. The takeaway should be working towards abolishing the police, because once we get to that point, we could start to build actual community-based policing, uh, policing community where they would have all courageously gone into a school that a shooting was happening at and tried their damnedest to stop it. That right there should be one of the basic cases of argument of why we should be working towards the road of abolition. And the reason why it's important to go so deep into detail about this is because the fact that the propaganda is going to work harder once it starts to get threatened. And we saw that start to take form after the George Floyd protests died down and they were able to temper the public support to the idea of reallocating funds from the police. And this is why we have to constantly challenge the propaganda. And I think my next story, which is the update on Patrick Lyoya, is such an important place to continue that transition. So, earlier today, it was announced that a Michigan police officer who killed Patrick Lyoya, a black man with a shot to the back of his head, has been charged with second-degree murder, prosecutors said. I think we've been through this similar song and dance when last year, in about, I believe, early June, roughly a year ago, when it was finally announced that Derek Chauvin was charged for the murder of George Floyd. And this is what I like to point out whenever these moments happen. There's going to be too many liberals who are going to have the wrong takeaway from this. And that is being that justice worked. And that's absolutely the wrong thing to take away when you hear this case because of the fact that there is no guarantee that this cop is actually going to get the fullest extent of his charges. Next is the fact that what the George Floyd uprising showed is that the court system has to sacrifice more cops in order to prevent more unruliness from the people. They got a bit of a taste of the riots from the George Floyd protest 2 years ago. And I think the court system's coming to realize is if they charge cops a bit more for their crimes, then that means they're going to keep people at bay. And the reason, and just like how people should, there's several fucking things that people should be uh, gathering in mass over and making their displeasure known to this government right now. As I pointed out, that border agents now getting to pretty much have diplomatic immunity when they enter your home unsolicited. And this is another part of it now. They're willing to sacrifice more cops than they used to be to maintain the justification of policing in this country. And this also reinforces the bad apples idea that if you just continue to get rid of a bad apple here and there, then the police, then it'll just get more liberals believing that, oh, the bullshit reforms that they throw out there, like, oh, they need more training. That shit will continue to fly. While people like me and other of us on the left who can see right through this tactic that is at hand. Yes, is it the right thing for cops to get charged for their abuse of power? Absolutely. But does that mean that we can't point out the way that they're weaponizing these things? No. And that's why I'm calling now, because this is what it means to me. And when you get to this whole idea of the bad apple, I've said this before. If I worked in produce for 9 years, I know produce. And if you can rework uh, a bag of bad apples early enough, you can do it very successfully. And this is such a bad analogy because this is so fucking late in the game to just think that the police system is just rotten to a core of an apple here and there. Because what the police system is really like, more like, is a package of blueberries or pomegranate seeds. Because the moment that one of them starts to go bad, they all go bad. And that's the concept that can't get through to so many people's head on this. Is that the whole system is rotted and corrupt. And we should not, and we eventually, and in my time in produce, we got to the point where we were able to start to donate more produce to like food banks. And let me take this one step further. That means with the way that the police system is rotted, we should not be donating, forcing this police system on the people like that completely bad produce that should have never been sent to a food bank in the first place. What we do have a chance to do is just completely get rid of all the bad produce which is my analogy for the police system, and replace it with fresh, brand new, community-based policing. As I've mentioned, and when our criminal justice system is so broken that we know that this guy is not likely to get charged to the fullest extent of what this charge is, and even that probably pales to what it should be for as long as we have a system where people need to be jailed. While honestly, in a system of reform, we could have a different discussion of how to reform corrupt cops. But for the time being, just know that even though this guy's getting charged, he's probably going to get off easier than what this second degree murder charge is. And this is why it's not too much to celebrate about, because they're going to use this to continue to make people believe that the police is reformable when they are absolutely not. All right, last but not least, uh, Washington Commanders defensive coordinator Jack Del Rio shot himself in the foot yesterday with some statements comparing those George Floyd protests in the January 6th. So I'm going to start off with the original quote where JDR shot himself in the foot. And you can tell that he's fully on that right-wing propaganda as I read this quote. I can look at images on TV. People's livelihoods are being destroyed. Businesses are being burned down, no problem. And then we have a dust up at the Capitol. Nothing burned down. And we're going to make that a major deal? It's two standards. Let's have a discussion. Yeah, that. My bad. I forgot to make that more readable for those of you watching. But even if you don't think it's pathetic how January 6th is being portrayed as this high priority issue, that was not exactly a dust up. And if you're going to call that a dust up, think about all the other like famous fights in sports that you can think of, where it was mainly just known for like one big punch being thrown and just a bunch of pushing and shoving after. Were those just dust ups now? Jack Del Rio. And you can tell that he's one of those people who is definitely deep into the right wing media bubble when he makes this type of comparison. And I know that there's a follow up to this, and I'm gonna like got to comment on that one. Let's see, where's the follow up quote? Hey, there's me, live right now. All right, where is it? I'm gonna look for it in the background for the follow up quote where he walked back the statements. And it's pretty pathetic, even though I will call out the way that liberals will blow it out of proportion how important it was January 6th because of all the other major pressing issues of how the worsening conditions of the people that have only continued to worsen and worsen since 2020 and even years and years before that. And I think I'm just going to have to find this follow-up article quote from the article posted by Mike Freeman. Wow. USA Today is now paywall. It's sad. But he pretty much walked back that quote saying, "Oh, I guess people have rights to protest, but I'm always going to be against your means of protesting, except for like the rare moments that the right decides to do it." That's pretty much it, though. Then there's people calling for him to get fired. I know that's a big PR thing, that especially when you're the Washington Commanders and the problems that you've gone through over the past couple years, specifically Dan Snyder and un, the institutional problems that they had in their front office, and how Ron Rivera, the about to be third-year head coach of the team, has cleaned things up enough to where their independent investigation felt like they were doing better. You're, and that's obviously going to make Jack more of a target to get fired, and that's going to be a liberal outrage-driven one, and I think that really doesn't mean anything, except for the fact it would probably be a good thing because you're getting rid of a bottom third defensive coordinator with enough front seven talent to where that team should not be like 23rd or 24th overall in defense. If that's a good reason to fire Jack Del Rio, fire him based on the fact that he's a very pathetic defensive coordinator in these days, and that there's enough defensive talent in Washington to where they should at least be in the upper half of the league. And that with the way things are looking this season, that team is probably going to be disappointing again on defense. And it's absolutely going to fall on the heels of that dirtbag Jack Del Rio. So, with that being said, that's it for tonight's episode of the Rochford Files, hosted by yours truly, Andrew Rochford. So please go like the stream on YouTube, go to Twitch and give me a follow there. Next, I've been slacking on the whole uploading to Odyssey and Rumble, but yes, it would help if you followed and subscribed there as well. And next week, things are looking up. I do have a guest booked for next week. And in addition to that, I'm also working. I will be trying to get Sunny K back on the show sometime over the weekend. I would like to do that one of those days. But then next Tuesday, I do got a good guest on. He's a guest who would be a very good fit with the way we cover content on here. And his name is Chuck Modi. He is a he into sports and covers social justice in the DC area. So Chuck Modi, the next guest on Tuesday's show at 9 p.m. Eastern. So that'll be a very good episode. Hopefully, there will be multiple stories to cover related to the sports world, because that's what you would ideally like when me and him are a pretty good match on covering issues like we do. So, with that being said, don't forget to follow me on Twitter, as you can see on the screen, at NugLifeConrad. And for those of you just listening, it's NuGlifeConrade. Don't forget, also go to the link tree in the description on YouTube, and that's where you can find all the other links related to me and the show right there. With that being said, it's time to unlace them. This is Andrew Rochford saying goodbye and good night.